guys, how's it going? We are in the greenhouse again this morning. It's just so beautiful out here and so cozy. In fact, I probably won't even be wearing my coat for most of this project. I think it's close to 70 in here right now. We are going to be potting up our pre-sprouted Ranunculus and Anemones, and then we are going to pre-sprout some dahlias. So here are the trays of Anemone and Ranunculus. Some did beautifully in this process and some are a little bit further behind. And then right back here, Cheddar, kitty kitty, Cheddar. Cheddar's giving himself a bath right there. But I've got some dahlia tubers that I want to line up and pre-sprout. A couple of reasons why you might want to pre-sprout your Anemones, Ranunculus, dahlias is for one, earlier blooms, or two, to check viability of your tubers or bulbs or corms. So in the case of the Ranunculus and Anemones, I wanted to run an experiment. I pre-sprouted mine last year and then planted them straight out in the garden, but I started the process on March 1st and then planted them out on March 13th. So I wanted to try it a little bit earlier to see if I could get them growing on here in the greenhouse so we had earlier blooms. If you're doing the pre-sprouting and potting up for earlier blooms, you do have to make sure you have a spot for them to grow on where it's warm enough for them and also where they get tons of bright light. And that usually is the problem. I couldn't really do a whole lot of that before because our greenhouse was a cold frame at the time. It did not have heat, but now that we can control heat like at nighttime, I know that it's not going to dip below. We have it set at 60 now, so it doesn't dip. Well, sometimes it dips like maybe a degree or two below 60, but it's not going to go down far enough to do any harm. And then for our dahlias today, the reason why I'm pre-sprouting those is that I want to check their viability. I did a bunch of dividing yesterday of dahlias. I'm going to be packing all of those tubers back up, the ones that are really nice still, but there were some that either broke off of the main clump or some that just kind of like I was unsure about if I got a really good growth point or so you can pre-sprout them just to see if you have viable tubers still. So whatever ends up being viable, I'm just going to go ahead and pot up and put here in the greenhouse. And I could pack all of those tubers up with my others and just bring them out a few weeks before I'm ready to plant and pre-sprout them at that time if I didn't want to pot them up and grow them on early. So let's tackle the Ranunculus and Anemones first. So Rose Ranunculus, we've got Labelle Champagne, we've got Marshmallow, Labelle Picotee, and Salmon. Oh, these look good. Ooh, look at these. Look at all of those healthy roots. Oh my goodness. This was a good experiment for me this year because I've never stored Ranunculus or Anemones, and some of these ended up in a crate with, like, it's not actually peat moss. It was kind of a barky mixture, but it's just something basically to cover them so they don't completely dry out. And then some varieties were just in open saucers, like open to the air with no storage medium around them. So I need to run into the root cellar and figure out which ones, because I still have a whole bunch in there to pre-sprout and grow. I need to figure out which varieties were left to kind of their own devices and which ones we actually stored a little bit better. Either way, everything's looking pretty good. Now the Anemones, I'm surprised by this right here. Look at that. It's a massive, tons of good growth. Last year when I pre-sprouted, well, there's like a growth point right here that even looks good. Last year there was absolutely no sign of anything on my Anemones after I pre-sprouted them, and they still all grew. So this is looking good. I think I did 10 of these. Oh, that's not looking so hot. Not really. Still pretty firm. It looks like there's a little white root coming out right there. And I think I'm just gonna pot everything up that comes out of here, whether or not it looks like it's got tons of roots or no roots. The only things I will toss if I find any are anything that seems squishy or have any mold on them. I doubt I'm gonna find that. I'm gonna run to the root cellar though, because I really wanna figure out which varieties are in the saucers. Okay, so in the saucers we have the Salmon Ranunculus, all the Anemones, ooh, some apple cider vinegar that's wanting to fall over, and Labelle Picotee. So Salmon, Labelle Picotee, and the Anemones were just stored in open air. We did not clean them off fully, so that may have been to our advantage. So they technically did have a little bit of something around their roots, but nothing else. The rest of them were stored in this, kind of like a barky mixture. They all kind of look the same though. Either way, it definitely is a learning year for me. If I figure out that I can get away with not packing them away in crates and I can just kind of dump them in a container and not do anything, that's what I'm going to do this next year. Okay, so there's not much to this process except I'm going to be using the organic potting mix right here. Got a whole bunch of it thawed out in here. And then I've been saving containers, like old pansy containers. Let's see, this one had a pansy frizzle sizzle blue in it. This one had a Dryopteris, a fern. So I've been hanging on to containers and flats because it just makes everything way easier to haul around. Plus, I will only need to make one tag per flat instead of a tag for every single pot. Okay, so first I think we should get in here and see how many of these look really good. So we'll start with the rows first. So clearly that one looks great. We're just gonna kind of dig them up and take a look at them quick. That one looks good. This one does not look like much of anything. Ooh, see, look, squishy mold. This one's gonna be tossed. Okay, so we've got 2, 4, 6, 8, 10, 12, 13 that look, well, either really amazing or promising. And then we had 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 that we are going to toss. No signs of life. And even though like the tentacles, I don't know if that's what you call them, they're pretty firm on one side, but they're, you can see right there, squishy on the other side. I don't think I want to mess with that. To plant these, put a little bit of soil at the bottom of the container, just like that. And then we put our corm down in the pot. You want to bury them 2 to 3 inches below the soil surface. And then we're going to top it up with soil. So 13 out of 18 I think is pretty good. I am gonna pull one more because this one is still pretty firm, and as I inspect it a little further, I can see a growth point. I don't know if you guys can see, it's kind of buried in there. I think it's worth a shot. So let's check the anemones because the rest of the ranunculus will be pretty much the same, and then I'm just gonna get all of this done. Also, when we plant these out in the garden, if we were to do them in rows, they need to be spaced about 9 inches apart. Your anemones, we plant the same depth, so 2 to 3 inches under the soil surface. And then when we plant these out in the garden, you want to go 6-inch spacing. So of course that one looks awesome. A little bit of roots on the bottom of that one. That one's got some roots. So does that one. Not much action on this one, but if you get in close, I don't know if you can see that little green growth point right there. I think we're gonna get growth on that. Okay, 9 of the 10 are showing signs of growth, either in like tons of roots or maybe a swollen growth point. So all of those have one or the other. This is the only one that doesn't show either. And it's got kind of a gray cast to it. It's still really firm though, so I'll still probably plant it and we'll see what happens. Okay, same here. A little bit of soil in the bottom, like that. Take one of our corms, pop it down in there, and top it up. Oh, that's a ranunculus. Also, I don't think I mentioned, but on the anemones, you know, the roots kind of face downward. You can see last year's stock, so you kind of know which way to plant that one. But usually, if you don't see anything on it, usually you'll see some sort of roots, but the pointy end, typically, it faces down on these. So see, they all kind of have a bigger top, and then they come down to a point down here. Let's see this one, kind of the same thing, bigger top, and then it comes down to a point right here. So that faces down. And then these are planted, the ranunculus, just like dahlias, with the tentacles facing down, and the growth points come up from that. Okay, so now I'm gonna plant all of these and get them all watered in. All right, 108 pots filled. I'm seeing one that's looking a tiny bit shallow. I'll have to add a little bit more soil to that one, but 10 of them are anemone and 98 of them are ranunculus. A few of them, just a small handful, were kind of questionable that I planted because I hadn't seen any growth or roots or anything like that. but time will tell. And I didn't have to toss very many, just the 4 initially, and then this small pile right here. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Not bad. So 11 total that I tossed. So what is that? 109 ranunculus total I had in the trays, 11 I tossed. That's really exciting. And some of these are like kind of questionable. Like they might do something, but look at that. Look at the mold on that one. There's a couple of them that look just, ooh, yuck. 4 for sure. These still have a little bit of firmness to them. I don't know. Yeah, I don't think so. So all I need to do with these now is water them in, and I'll just do that lightly, and I won't water them very much because I had pretty wet soil I was dealing with for the most part. One of the bags, it took about a bag and a half of soil to do all of these containers, and they're 1 cubic foot bags, just to give you an idea. Anyway, the one bag was completely wet because it had been outside and it was frozen, and we brought it in to thaw out, so I won't have to water very much. When I start seeing growth above the soil surface, I'll start watering a little bit more regularly. So we'll have to see how many of these actually emerge from their containers. It'll be really exciting. And then, like I said before, we're keeping it at 60, like it won't go below 60 at night, and usually it gets up. Like right now it's 73 in here. I have the front door popped open a bit because it was getting a little much. Here comes the sun again. It went behind the cloud for a minute. But a couple of days it's been in the 80s in here. So growth should happen pretty quick. Okay, so now we're gonna work on pre-sprouting the dahlias. We're gonna use the same trays I used to pre-sprout the ranunculus. I'll probably have to grab a couple more trays. I am going to, after I get them all set up in here in their trays, I'm gonna move them inside into the studio under a grow light and in an area that stays consistently at 70, which is the studio's at 70 or maybe a couple of degrees higher consistently, and I think we'll get some growth a little bit faster. So these are the ones that were just questionable. Like, I think we'll be fine. I think that there's a really nice eye here. This is a romantic mix. We've got all components here. The body of the dahlia, the neck looks nice, and then I think that's the growth point right there. Pretty sure I could probably pop this one in the ground and get some growth, but honestly it'll be kind of fun to just experiment with some of these, see what happens, and then I can pot them up and maybe use them in containers early for some early color. Yeah, like this one right here, this is a Melody Dora. This one popped off of the main clump, and I'm just not sure. We've got a body and a neck. Growth point, kind of questionable. I don't know if we've got anything solid enough there. But I've got several varieties here. I've got a couple of the Melody Dora, 1 pink mix. These right here, this whole pile, are Penny Lanes. These are all romantic mix: Lake Ontario, Rockstar, Night Butterfly, and Gudoshnik. Night Butterflies, for me, out of all these varieties so far, stored the worst. Like, it held on to a little bit too much moisture, I think. We'll see what happens. So we'll start with our trays and a shallow layer of potting mix at the bottom of each tray. So this is a little bit different than our potting up experiment that we are running, and it's going really well. I potted a bunch of tubers up just how I normally plant them, you know, putting them several inches underneath the soil surface. In fact, let me show them to you. I potted up 30 and 9 of them have sprouted. I haven't checked yet today. There's probably 1 or 2 more that have sprouted, but see that? I'm just hoping to grow these on, maybe even bumping them up in pot size so that we've got some really nice foliar growth by the time it's warm enough to put them outside, and then hopefully some blooms early. But this process is a little bit different in that I'm not actually covering the entire tuber. We're gonna leave the eye exposed to light. We're just gonna lay these on that soil surface. We'll cover the body up with a little bit of soil and water extremely lightly. Something like this, and we're just gonna lay all of these side by side. Okay, so that tray is all set up. The first row are Snowbound, then we have Penny Lane, then we have Rockstar, and then we have Lake Ontario right here. So I'm going to lightly water these. Let me grab my can, just a tiny little bit. And that's it, other than taking it into the studio, putting it under a grow light, which I will do with both of them here when I'm done. And it's just a really good way to do a lot of testing without taking up a lot of space or potting up each individual tuber. If you're not sure if it's going to grow, it's not worth all that extra effort. So we can just pre-sprout, check viability, pop the ones out that sprouted, pot them up and move them out here to the greenhouse. Or if you've got grow lights or a really bright windowsill, you can do it that way. And I think that's just the most important thing, which I think I mentioned before, is that if you're starting this type of project early, like this year, it's kind of an experiment for me, you just have to make sure you have room somewhere where they are going to get enough light. Otherwise, you'll end up with leggy, stringy looking plants that aren't very strong. So that's just something to consider. If you are in a position where you just don't want to dedicate the space to kind of housing these plants for a couple of months till you can put them outside, then I would just pre-sprout at the normal time and plant them out in the ground, or just pop the tubers like with the dahlias. I don't pre-sprout anything. I just pop them in the ground in May sometime after danger of frost. And Ranunculus and Anemones we do a little bit earlier, like I said, in March, because they are more cold tolerant. Okay, let's finish up this last tray of dahlias and get them into the studio. And that is it for Ranunculus and Anemones and pre-sprouting dahlias today. So it's just a waiting game at this point to see what happens and see what kind of results we get. I'm very encouraged by the Ranunculus and Anemones and how well they did in storage. It was kind of one of those things that I was hoping for the best, and you just never really know until you've tried it a couple of times. Sometimes it takes refining the process over the years too. A lot of trial and error, a lot of failure sometimes to get to that point where it actually works. So anyway, I'm very encouraged by what we found today, and I will be giving you progress reports as we go. I've just been so enjoying having some things to work on out here in the greenhouse and really try to utilize and enjoy this space being as warm as it is right now. In fact, I'll give you a little look quick at what we've got going on. We've got our poppies and leeks. We've got all of our snapdragons. Cabbage and broccoli, almost every single one of them are up. I've got kind of my stockpile of stuff I've been hanging on to as I plant things. And then this is the stuff I brought home from the garden center the other day. Oh, isn't it so pretty? We've got lupins, dahlias, a couple tomatoes I moved outside last night just to see how they would do. They look okay. The rest of them I left in the studio. Then our Ranunculus and Anemones. We've got a fig and boxwoods. We've got a couple Japanese maples and a rosemary. Our dahlias that I need to pack back up, I left them out since yesterday so that the cut ends could heal over, so we'll pack them back into these black crates. Our olive tree looks great. Our first spring containers are beautiful. I've got corn coming up in our corn and bean bed. I don't know if you guys can see it. Right there. See that? Yep. There's several little shoots of corn coming up. And then we've got stuff that we wintered over, which has a bunch of new growth I need to get out here and clean off the tops. A lot of the violas came back beautifully. And then no sign of peas yet, but our new lettuce crop is coming up. You see I put chicken wire over the top to keep the cats out. And then our radishes are looking beautiful. The other stuff hasn't germinated yet, but I'm not really expecting it to for the next little bit. Radishes are always super fast. Anyway, super quick tour of what's going on out here. Really fun time of year. Love that things are starting to pick up and we've got lots of projects to work on. So we will see you guys in the next video. Bye.